Thank you for joining me in the extended take of the OTB Collaboration Lab that we had at Grassroots this past fall. If you're joining us not from the GOA discussion group, I'm just running through a list of discussion topics that we had at an open table forum this past December in Denver. And the goal of the session was to bring retailers together and unite and brainstorm about philosophy, about open to buy, strategy, implementation techniques, and just to really get people discussing this, whether they're a buyer, an owner, a sales manager of their retail shop. And so let's just get started. So introduce yourself to the group, include your strengths and talents and your level of open to buy familiarity and your intention with this session. So my name is Carrie Watson and I'm the principal owner of Outside Looks, which is primarily a specialty outdoor retail consulting agency. And our goal is to help specialty retailers in the outdoor segment find profitability in their business through a number of different techniques. But mostly we want our retailers to be sustainable, around for the long time or the long run, and we want our retailers to find a balance where they can pursue the lifestyle that they want, but also the profitability that they intended whenever they open their business. Include your strengths and talents. My strength is open to buy, forecasting, nerding out over Excel, and merchandise planning with your open to buy familiarity and your intention for this session. And I already shared that. So the list of topics that we have, the first group of them is implementation. What does open to buy mean to you? To me, open to buy is that vital part of your business, of how you financially schedule your receiving and how you financially interpret what your KPIs are and how you translate your KPIs like turn, GMROI, margin, and sales, how you translate that into receiving and what it means for inventory targets. If you think about those KPIs, you can back figure, if you want a certain turn, you can back figure what your average inventory should be. So to me, open to buy is obviously how much to buy and what month you're gonna bring it in and how you're doing that in regards to sales growth, but it's a bigger picture strategically about designing your key performance indicators in your business, and which ultimately go into cash flow, but we'll talk about that later. So how do you decide the budget? When I was planning at Fossil, we did it through based on last year's sales, based on trends that we were seeing in the industry. When I started doing my consulting practice, I actually use a software that's called Retail Orbit. And Retail Orbit is an objective thing that we use at Outside Looks to help our retailers establish their open to buy budget. And Retail Orbit is a sales forecasting, inventory, merchandise planning tool that establishes these sales targets based on criteria that no human brain can wrap their head around. So it uses artificial intelligence, big data. We've got software engineers from Google, and we use the same technology that Amazon, Google, Target, Walmart, all of the same techniques that they use behind the scenes with all of their data, all their sales information. So we aggregate a lot of the information from all of the Retail Orbit clients, and we use it in a way that it makes it anonymous and it tags information in a way where we can predict trends across different areas of the country and based on different types of shopping centers, based on your sales history, of course, but also based on different industries and even the different category levels that you carry in your shop. So that's how we decide the budget, and we know what inventory ownership you should have in order to inventory ownership you should have in order to make your sales actually happen. So we give you those inventory targets too, and the perfect balance of when to bring in things to make those sales happen. And I could go on for days about it, but for the purpose of this, let's go to the next question. So how is your budget allocated over time, categories, and vendors? In an ideal scenario, you're allocating your budget over time into months. To me, you need to be receiving goods every single month in order to facilitate fresh new sales. When you're going across different categories, I don't like to use a top-down approach in order to anticipate what sales growth is. I like to use a bottom-up approach. So a top-down would be the accountant telling you, or the owner of your company, of your retail shop, saying we need to grow by 10% this year. And so you just take that 10% and you just flatly put it across all of your categories, all of your departments. Even though that doesn't make sense, because things like hard-sided coolers, things like strappy sandals, things like hammocks, we know that those things are not growing at this point in time in our industry. We know that running shoes, that casual covered up summer type shoes are trending up. We know that luggage is trending up. So it makes sense to do it on the bottom level, where some categories you purposefully grow because that is where the trend is, and some categories you purposefully shrink because it's the smart thing to do, because you're mitigating risk, so you're not investing in those. Just like if you're expecting bad news in the stock market of your favorite stock, then you're gonna pull out of that stock. Probably you're not exactly gonna invest more in it if you want it to bring you more of a return immediately. And then how do you allocate it across vendors? Follow where the money is. Follow the vendors that you have a great relationship with. Follow the vendors that feel good, that coincide with your brand strategy. As a retailer, you should have your own brand strategy, and go for somebody that's responsive, that agrees with how you do business, and don't try to force that relationship. There's so much product on the marketplace these days that you can find a replacement for a brand that's not treating you well. And outdoor retailers should hear that, because we can fall, quote unquote, victim to brands and their power on occasion. So retailers, you have it in you to grow past that, and you have your options. Anyway, I digress. So do you pre-season with all of your brands? If it's a brand where you know that availability is going to be a thing and a problem later on, then yes, pre-season with them to the best of your ability. It can be hard to do that, but the kind of vendor that I love to work with is somebody that understands that I'm going to pre-season a big portion of my business, but then I'm going to leave an additional portion open so that I can react to sales, so I can fill in that merchandise that was unexpectedly successful. And those types of brands that understand that I need to be able to react, that's the best type of relationship that I can have, the best type of brand that I can use in my store to react to what I see in the shop. A lot of brands you don't necessarily have to pre-season, and then those are my even more favorite, because if they have good availability, if they have a solid staff making things happen, then you can just buy what you need when you need it, and you don't have to feel like you have to warehouse it just so you can get it, and bring your bulk orders up early. That's a whole thing, but anyway. Okay, so how many ship dates do you schedule with a pre-season vendor? I would recommend at least 3. Maybe some of your larger brands you go into monthly. If shipping costs make sense to bring in monthly orders, a lot of times that flexibility, the increased cost of shipping, gives you so much freedom, and so your bills are going to be smaller, your cash flow is going to be more split up every month because your invoices are going to be due at different times. Sorry, that's my dog. But yeah, so What do you receive everything at once, or do you spread it out? What are the advantages and disadvantages of doing it each way? And how do these different approaches impact your turn rate? So I really feel for you if you say that you receive everything all at once, or even if you front load. And front loading is when you bring merchandise in super early because you feel forced for one reason or another in order to bring it early. If we think about that, it is one of my biggest pet peeves, because you're taking a lot of risks by bringing that much merchandise in early in the season. You can't be 1,000% sure what sales are gonna do. And then what happens if you mess up, or what happens if there's just a lot of risk that's associated with bringing in, front loading your merchandise. What are the advantages and disadvantages of each way? Well, I think you should spread it out over time. Again, I think the shipping cost is a relevant and acceptable expense when it gives you that much more flexibility. The disadvantage is that of front loading is that you might mess up. The advantage of front loading is that you get all of your product early in the season. The disadvantage to that is that you have big bills soon. So for instance, if you receive all of your fall and winter goods, if you receive them in Q3 before Q4 cash happens, then you've got some really big bills that are potentially due in October or November before you have your wham bam December sales and that cash in your register to pay those big bills. So that can be a disadvantage to front loading. A disadvantage to flowing merchandise in every month is that you might run out of availability. You have, but you should be able to find it from other people if you can't get it from your original source. You should be able to find something similar, at least that fits the same need. If you bring in merchandise, another disadvantage to flowing in merchandise, well, there's not very many. You have a few more ship dates to handle. You have a few more revisions to do maybe, but honestly, it's a much more responsible way to react to sales, to be a constant reminder to be looking at your business in a responsible way. So how do you use these different approaches to impact your turn rate? Well, if you think about turn, which is a metric that compares your sales to your average inventory, turn is the average inventory is what is a really impactful and easy to change part of the sales to average inventory equation. Because sales are within, we hope that they're growing on an annual basis, but inventory, all you have to do is write one big old order and your inventory can fluctuate massively. So your average inventory is the key component of turn. And so if you front load everything and your inventory stays really big and fat and chunky during Q3, and then it dwindles down over Q4, then your average inventory is obviously going to be higher because you sustained all of this for so much longer. If you bring in your orders little by little every month and really bring in what is designed to sell the next month, then you have the ability to keep your average inventory much lower, keep your average cost of goods that you own much lower, and you might receive this much, but then you might also sell that much and your average inventory stays the same. So if you're looking at turn and wondering why your turn is sluggish or why it's below 2 or 1, this is why, because you're probably front loading goods, and it's as simple as that. Okay, so do you add the preseason discount into your individual item cost? I think you should, to the best of your ability, because you start to reflect what the vendor, that part of the vendor relationship is. If it's a meaningful discount, then you can see it there. Any markdowns that you take, will be less of an impact because you're adding value to your vendors, to the vendor's product by putting the discount into the item cost. Okay, so moving on into vendor relations. What do you prioritize with vendor terms packages, dating or discount, and why? There is a thing in our industry where our vendors will give us 120 days dating. Well, that means that, okay, well, if I receive it October 1st, then I don't have to pay for it until January. Well, what do I think about that? Well, I don't like it. I hate dating because dating gives you a chance to be lazy in your business. You are not motivated to sell things that you have on 90-day dating. And this is why. If you receive something and you have 90 days to pay for it, then you don't feel the pressure in order to sell those things by the time 90 days is up. You kind of keep pushing it off to sell it. If you have the extended dating until the end of the season, that is a big, huge trap that a lot of my retailers don't fully think through, or not my retailers, a lot of retailers in the industry don't fully think through. Because if you're expecting, let's say the brand gives you 20% growth bonus, and if you do a 20% brand growth during the preseason, then they'll give you those January 31st dating terms. What I don't like about that is that you are artificially growing your sales, and you can't exactly be confident that those sales are going to happen. So you receive 120% of what you did the prior year all at once, all in October. And what happens if those sales don't come to fruition? Well, you might need to go on discount, but the brands make it really hard to talk about discounts. But what am I supposed to do if I can't sell it in those 120 days? So I just feel like it's taking a lot of risk and bubbling it up all into one big old speed bump in the very beginning of the season, when cash flow is tender, when you're bright-eyed and googly-eyed about what the potential of the season could be. But what happens if weather doesn't come to fruition? What happens if election talk has people scared about how they're spending money for this quarter? What happens if there's some kind of real estate bubble or stock market bubble? I mean, there's just lots of unknowns. Even I've had retailers that have had natural disasters happen during pivotal points in their selling season, and because we were in a healthier inventory positioning, it wasn't as risky as it could have been if they would have lost that much product all at once because their inventory levels were so high. So enough about that. What are your favorite buying programs or business arrangements that you have? I personally like it when a brand will offer me a swap, when I can send back product and bring in new product. You have to be careful with the swap so that you don't accidentally bring in too much every single time, because then that brand over time would get bigger. But I like swaps because it forces you to have that relationship with your vendor, with your sales rep. And it's a nice constant touch point, and it's a good way to keep merchandise fresh. And when you don't have to mark it down in order to get it out of your shop, it adds a lot of margin points and it adds a lot of value, in my opinion. What does a brand do to make you feel cared for? A brand can cultivate a relationship with me that is predictable, that feels like it's business forward, but also that they care about what I'm going through as a business. Somebody that brings an agenda and somebody that has a constant list of topics to discuss, or even will come with agenda points of how we can grow business or even collaborate together in an effective manner. That's when a brand makes me feel cared for. How often do you talk to your favorite reps, and what do you talk about? I would say monthly is the ideal. What do we talk about? I mean, gosh, it could be, it's of course business, it's of course sell-through, it's of course margin, it's of course inventory, and it's of course sales. But what else do we talk about? Well, things like paddleboarding, or how my dog is doing, or the brisket that my husband and I smoked last weekend. So it's important to keep people in the equation of your favorite sales reps, of your relationship with your favorite sales reps. And how do you ask for help or assistance on a bad product? If it's towards the end of the season, or I can't swap out product, or there's an availability issue with the brand, then I'll ask for markdown dollars. There's ways that you can figure out approximately how much your markdown dollars will be on that remaining inventory, and just ask the brand if you can split it. Ask the brand for just help, or maybe they know of another retailer that needs that product, and who knows, maybe that retailer will purchase it from you at wholesale. You just never know. So just be open to different solutions whenever you bring up bad product performance with your sales rep. Okay, so big picture questions now. So strategy and philosophy. How do you plan for category growth or shrinkage? This needs to be done on the category level. And with a product like Retail Orbit and the Management One merchandise planning that goes in behind it, I've been able to help a retailer shrink their women's sandal business by single digits, and it's probably their third largest category in the entire company, and then grow their women's running business approximately 60 to 70% year to date over last year, because of the way that we're growing and shrinking the right classes and the right categories at the right time, and peaking the different inventory levels, and using sales to prove what we're chasing and why we're chasing it. It's proved to be very good for them, and their entire footwear department is up 10 percentage points this year. And we're talking about, that's 30% of the store's revenue is up 10%, and the whole store is up 7%. So these things, these category shrinkages are not always a bad thing if we're balancing it with chasing and growing other categories in their place. What's your most meaningful metric, and why do you appreciate it? Most meaningful metric to me is turn. I really like seeing turn or stock to sales. It gives us that level of average inventory, and it gives us a nice snapshot of what the store actually looks like at any given point in time during the season. Do you have monthly inventory goals? Why is it, or why is it not important to you? And hint, it should be important. Like I mentioned earlier, inventory goals I think are underrated. The classic example of when I walk into a retailer that I start helping for the first time, my initial visit, they might come to me and say, well, we have so much great inventory, sales are up, margins up, just things are going so well.